Hello and welcome. Today we're going to be talking about middle childhood development from a psychosocial perspective to get us started. So, in this age, this is when our children become extremely logical, and I'm definitely seeing it with my 10-year-old now. She's always trying to create arguments and work against me, and definitely showing that she's becoming an independent creature. But here, when we're looking at ages 7 to 11, we're looking at this concrete operational beginning, this potential for us to be able to use our logic, to use all of our knowledge, this huge memory system to make sense of reality, to figure out how life works, the order of things, okay? So again, we're getting into this concrete operational thought that we develop when we become adults. But here again, we're still kind of in that pre-operational stage. Again, kids during 7 to 11, they haven't totally worked out, how to use logic. But by about 10, by about 11, you can see that definitely start to solidify. And then once they go on beyond that, then they really get into abstract thinking, which is kind of where we're going. But again, this is the idea that kids at this age, they're using logic to make sense of reality. So the main difference between pre-operational and concrete operational, again, is logic. As they begin to look outside of their own head and make sense of reality, this ability for them to use logic grows. And again, I wouldn't say the average 7-year-old has it. By about 11, this really starts to develop it. So the book breaks it down to what are these components of logic and how can we, look at kids and figure out whether or not they have, made sense of reality. One form is classification. So, your the thing the this thing your book has a couple examples, but I like the one that Piaget used, and it says that he showed kids 9 flowers, 7 yellow daisies, and 2 white roses, and then asks, "Are there more daisies or more flowers?" And 7-year-olds, might answer more daisies because they see 7 daisies versus 2 roses, but they haven't really figured out that both roses and daisies are flowers, right? Because again, the answer would be 9. But then by about 8, most children can classify this idea of more flowers than daisies. So again, our ability to classify information and use knowledge all goes back to schematic thinking. Again, our brain just has memories. Let me go back. So all of your knowledge is basically stored memories, and your ability to, retrieve those memories and then interconnect those memories to make sense of reality. Again, all your knowledge is just memories, which are really just cells releasing neurotransmitters. And again, that's a whole cool conversation. Watch my lecture on memory on my YouTube video if you're interested. But absolutely fascinating that all our memories are is somehow cells storing information using chemical neurotransmitters. Makes no freaking sense, but that's how it works. Okay. But again, as our brain is develops these schemas of knowledge, think about New York City. And each one of those skyscrapers is a classification category, like one skyscraper for dog, and then all the dogs, one for flower, all the flowers, math. Now, that's not exactly correct because our brain and all the skyscrapers are storing information in different skyscrapers simultaneously. So, yes, you have these schemas for dogs, but again, your ability to retrieve the dog and think about dogs and then apply your knowledge of dogs and interact with dogs uses all parts of your brain. So, again, it's a little bit more complicated than that. But again, our ability to classify information, to organize information. So as your brain becomes more and more organized and you categorize information to make sense of reality, again, your logic is going to grow more. Another idea is sequence, learning the order of things. And again, um, at what age do we learn the order of things? So it says by about age 5, children count to 100, but without seriation, they cannot correctly estimate where any particular two-digit number will be placed on a line that starts at 0 and at 100. But then gradually through middle adulthood or middle childhood, the kids get ready. They start learning sequences. You guys all do your number lines, right? When you do a 0 and here, and then you say, where on the number line does this go, right? At what age are they teaching that? Like third grade, right? Second, third grade, they really start to teach this seriation. But again, 6-year-olds don't really have it, but 7, 8, 9, 10, the ability of seriation is pretty easy. Your book has this picture here of different ages. So 4 to 5, they can understand the concepts in a book, so they can recognize the letters and they can understand their own names. 6 to 7, they start to learn consonants and vowels. By 8, they can read out loud simple sentences, 50 words a minute. Definitely, and they're starting to make sense of what they're reading. By 9 and 10, they should be able to understand paragraphs, chapters, use punctuation. And then by 11 or 12, they become fluent in reading and writing, and then they're ready for middle school, basically. So again, compounding on this knowledge, we also have math. So again, as our ability to organize concepts and the ability to use seriation and the ability to learn what the symbols for numbers mean and then how to manipulate these symbols, this again is a compounding thing. So again, why do you do calculus in high school and easy math in elementary school? But think about it. It's just all about scaffolding. So the way we teach our kids, no matter what it is scaffolding. Slowly we teach them the language. Then we teach them what the words mean by pointing at things. Then they start to use grammar and they learn how to manipulate the words and use complete sentences. Then they're learning easy math, right? And they're doing things with their hands, like the beginning of hitting baseballs, the beginning of playing t-ball, the beginning of gymnastics, using instruments, whatever it might be. And then over time, what do? You grow, you build, you have more experiences playing sports, playing instruments, doing math. And so that stuff that used to be hard then becomes easy. Then when stuff becomes easy, what do? We add on more work for the kids. We challenge them with newer math, harder baseball. We take the tee away from you. Instead of having a short basketball hoop, we put it up to 10 feet by third, fourth, fifth grade, and they're having to shoot on a full basket, which can be hard for a kid that age. So again, math is the same thing. Math, remember, like the numbers don't actually mean anything. The number one or the sign for a number one, I could, draw a letter A and write A equals one and then make math equations using letters if I really want to. So again, letters, numbers, those are social constructions. We're the ones who come up with the symbol. We decide what that means. And then, then we teach you what that is. That's why math and reading isn't like, yes, kids can learn to count naturally, but again, doing advanced calculus requires socialization. You have to learn the language of mathematics, what the symbols means. But same thing with learning language and then having to read. So talking is an automatic response, but reading is not an automatic response. Reading is hard for kids because they have to be taught what the symbols mean, what they equal, and then how to use them. Okay? So this is where Vygotsky and culture comes in, and he says, look, if you want to create a rocket scientist, if you can want to create a kid that can read fluently, if you really want to create kids that are, mold kids, then maybe not create them again, because we're all independent, but mold children to be excellent sports stars. How do we do this? So much of it's culture interaction. Okay, think about how you learn math. Did your parents teach you math before you got to kindergarten? Were they teaching you to read before you got to kindergarten? Because those gives you advances once you get to kindergarten because you already kind of know what's up, and so you're prepared to learn that information. And so, again, as society, individuals invest in children. As we socialize you, we teach you our language, we teach you our knowledge, our value systems, our beliefs, our traditions, our way of life. Kids then adopt these, mimic them, imitate them, try to do what we're teaching them to do. And in so they internalize that knowledge. And then we are all of it with the goal of producing kids that can take on the roles of people as we get older so that we can reproduce society from generation to generation. So again, we teach kids how to think and what to think about with agents of socialization, your parents, your peers, your siblings, your school environment, the media, whatever you're exposed to, that is how you learn about how the world works. That's how you learn about numbers. So again, if you really want to mold kids, we also have to push them though. So again, do we need to motivate kids and push them and have these external motivations and sometimes rewards to get what we want, for example? But again, we want kids to acquire knowledge so that they can role take, because eventually I'm going to be old. I need my son to take over the farm, right? And that's kind of the idea. But kids on their own aren't necessarily going to learn math and super advanced English and crazy vocabulary. Again, like, that's why in school we get exposed to vocabulary tests. That's why we push kids to read books and then write reports about it to demonstrate that they're adopting our knowledge. So again, very important is this idea of education, not only with the education system, but again, you are being educated every time you interact in the world. When I first had to flip an egg as a cook, nervous as heck, but by the time I was done in my restaurant career, I was a GM of breakfast and lunch places and fine dining restaurants that did super fancy brunches, But I remember that first time I had to work a steak broiler, just getting a feel for steak temperatures or flipping a pasta in a saute pan or then spinning it on your plate, so it makes like a circle in the pot and the pasta falls over the top to make beautiful plate presentation. Again, I had to be taught all of this. Again, long before I was a professor, I was a server, a cook, then a sous chef, then an executive chef, then a front of the house manager, kitchen manager, general manager of, lower places. And then as I got better and better, I went to nicer and nicer places. And again, every time I had to go, my wine knowledge is so extensive. And a lot of my wine knowledge simply comes from doing inventory of wines, of 100, 200 wine lists over and over and over again inform me about wine, what's good, what's bad, yada, yada, yada. So again, the same thing with the kids. How do you learn how to become a sommelier? Well, you got to teach those kids everything about grapes and varieties and regions and geography and wind and how things like the wind and the ocean creates grapes, because again, the best grapes grow in the toughest, hardest environments to grow them, you know what I mean? And so it's like not that we're going to teach kids about wine, obviously, but hopefully I'm teaching the college kids so we can talk to you a little bit. But again, what are we teaching the kids? We have to teach them both the fine and gross motor skills, how to use their bodies. We have to teach them how to get their brains to use their bodies, and then we have to teach them how to use their brains and think, okay? So again, do we invest in all kids equally? No. And so again, that's where you start to get into inequality because some kids going to better schools, get better teachers, and end up scoring higher on tests and making more money. And again, when you get into the sociology of it all, what's up? And again, that's all about socioeconomic status. Kids from higher socioeconomic status are more likely to graduate college because they have the resources, the education, the prep work to achieve those goals, yada, yada, yada. So again, the world is not fair. We don't invest in all kids equally. And so, as you look out in the world, think about that. Think about socialization in different regions, growing up in different socioeconomic statuses. How does that influence the way you think? All right. Now, into again, the neuroscience of it all is as you teach kids the dendrites in their brain, the connections between parts of their brain, the interstate systems that move the neurons around in your brain, the map of your brain becomes more and more advanced. Again, think about a forest. You plant a tree, a male and a female, and then they interact and they have babies. And now you have some more trees, and then they interact and have babies. And now you have more trees. And now look out at your forest, and it's just nothing but trees and branches. That's exactly how the brain is. The physical side of it is as we invest in kids, as you teach kids new things, new knowledge, and then also how to relay new knowledge to old knowledge, to build on knowledge, to build a memory bank of knowledge in order to interact in the world and be able to do what you want. That's the goal, right? So the goal is to activate the brain, to grow the physical dendrites of the brain, to grow the connections of the brain. And again, your book gets into like, a computer program, right? Think about computers from the 80s. They worked slow. We had floppy disks. Then we moved on to CDs. They got faster. I haven't seen a CD since I was like 20s, my 20s. That's how far advanced we are. And now everything's pretty much instantaneous. There's almost no delay. That's what happens with your brain. Modern computers advance over the last 40, 50 years. Look at kids' brains. They advance over 50 years. And before you know it, they're doctors and lawyers and they're full of all this cool information, right? But again, how do they become doctors and lawyers? How do you learn how to write briefs and dissertations, You have to be taught the scaffolding of knowledge to learn how to do scholarly writing. I sucked at scholarly writing when I first started graduate school. I just sucked because I wasn't socialized into that knowledge. I had to learn over time. And again, as we've been saying, practice makes perfect, and your book uses the word automation. The more you do stuff, the easier it is, the more automatic it is. And it's not that it's automatic. I mean, it can go from like a conscious to an unconscious process, and that's kind of what they mean by it being automatic. But the other side of something being automatic is if you do something so many times, you don't have to think about it anymore. Your brain just does it for you because you've already developed the neural pathway. You've already built the road. You've built it into a highway that works really, really fast. Okay. So again, the more you play golf, if you think about it, you might screw up your golf game. You just kind of sometimes you just gotta let it go. So again, as that's what I've been saying this whole time. As kids go through school for 12 years and then on to college for 4 and then maybe another 4 more after that. I mean, I have 20 years of college apparently. Hopefully I've learned some academic skills and it's more automatic and it's super easy for me to just knock out papers. And it has become easier over time. And again, that's the idea that knowledge begets knowledge. As you interact in the world and you have experiences and you internalize that information and then you store that information as memories and then be able to retrieve your memories, your knowledge bank, right? Kids become better able to judge, they become more accurate, they decide, what's worth putting into their long-term memory and what's not. And again, your brain is always pruning and growing as you interact in life. And then finally, this idea of control processes come in is that over time, our metacognition, our ability to think about thinking, and our meta memory, knowing about memory, grow over time. Our meta memory grows because our knowledge grows because we keep experiencing things in life. And as we experiencing things in life, and then we store that information as long-term memory, that becomes our memory bank. But which I haven't even opened this idea in this class yet because it's not like your book goes deep. But again, your identity itself is based upon your memory bank. If you stroke out and lose parts of your memory bank, that will affect your identity and your perception of who you are. So your identity is highly based upon the pillars in your memory that you've decided really structure how you think, who you think you are, and how you behave. Very cool stuff. So again, as our meta memory, our knowing about memory and our metacognition, thinking about thinking grow, which really means as our memory banks grow and our ability to reflect upon our life and access our memories to make sense of reality and decide who we are as people, our identity forms, our personality forms, and again, you get into these really cool beautiful concepts. And again, so I put this as cool neuroscience. As your prefrontal cortex grows, right? Your executive functioning grows. As your emotion centers grow, as the parts of your brain that does math and the parts of your brain that does music grow, your brain develops what this they call hubs. And I like this idea, so I put this whole thing in here. Please read this over. I'm not going to read through it all because it's just a cool idea. But it basically says like your brain is like a United States map, basically. And these hubs, imagine, are like New York, Columbus, Chicago, Jacksonville, Florida. And in each one of these located parts of your brain, maybe those areas specialize in math and then language over here and reading back here and colors back here. But if you think about it kind of like a map, and each city is like a little bit of a hub where you have these specialized areas, it's very interesting. And your book says it really interesting like this. Okay, so your brain doesn't have a specific area for reading. Why? Because reading is a new invention. So your brain reads using all kinds of different parts of your brain. However, the language side of your brain and the Broca's area is very specific. Like there's a specific part of your brain that does language. That's natural. Reading is not. Same thing with music. So hubs that are part of your music are using language to make music because there's words. You're using sounds to make music, right? So you're using your temporal lobe. Sometimes you make music with feel and touch, like on a piano or a guitar, and the way it vibrates in your fingers and the way you bend it in the tone. So you're using like your parietal lobe. And it's just so cool that your brain has specific parts of your brain that have evolved over time to regulate heartbeats and your limbic system for emotions, and your hypothalamus plays a role in that. Your amygdala plays a role in that. And different parts of your brain will play a roles in these things, but when it comes to your outer part of your brain, again, some of the more new things that humans do, like art, music, math, use many parts of your brain, which they call hubs. So if you get a chance to look those over. And again, just to kind of wrap it up, language grows over time as kids experience the world. They learn more and more words. Hopefully, yes, this may cap out, but if you keep pushing yourself and you keep trying to learn words, like lately, one of my favorite words is ontogenesis, studying somebody across the lifespan or how a person develops and evolves across the lifespan. Or what's some of my other favorite words? I don't know. I could go on for days, but I don't want to bore you guys with it. Mostly I'm thinking about genetics. And so now I want to do a deep dive into epigenetics. And so epigenetics is like one of the new words that I've learned. And I keep asking, like, how does the environment influence your gene expression? And all these really cool questions. And so I had to learn the word epigenetics and what it means. But then that led me into genetics. And then that led me into DNA and alleles and chromosomes and all this cool, complicated biology, because that's what psychology does to you. Somehow you end up in biology and sociology all the time. Hope you guys enjoyed this one and have a wonderful day.